It's not every day that you get to capture an interview with an award-winning documentary filmmaker and a handful of other amazing keynote speakers. This past week, I had the opportunity to capture the RTRX 2024 event and all the keynote speakers. Now, this was all possible due to my friend Bobby. Now, I'm so grateful Bobby brought me into this. He had me come in as a director. I know most of the time I'm DPing a lot of projects, but we had worked together indirectly on a previous project, and he wanted to bring me in to kind of direct these interviews, give them a more elevated look, and to just kind of be fully focused on that. A lot of times I find myself really leaning towards the artistry side of things and wanting to apply my craft and do the things, and not every project's going to allow you to do that. I think at the core of everything, it's always trying to find people that, you see eye to eye with and make things together that you all feel really proud of. And I love when I get to do projects like this. I love when the stakes are high, and I love when I get to meet great leaders that have great things to say, because there's a double win of yes, I get to be a filmmaker, but I also get to learn a lot in the process. And that's part of what I love the most about this sport. Things have obviously been crazy for a little while. And, it's moments like this that really remind me why I got into filmmaking, why I love filmmaking, and getting to kind of apply my skill set to this. Talking head interviews in general aren't always the most exciting thing. But for me, I really love and appreciate the challenge of making a space work, making people feel really comfortable, and doing a lot with very little. I felt like this would be a good opportunity to kind of unpack, my directing style with doing talking head interviews and how to get the most out of that from a director standpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical side. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to collaborate with others. But most importantly, when you're dealing with, a quick timeline, we only had 5 minutes to 15 minutes for each one of these interviews. So you got to make them matter. So it takes a lot to build that rapport, to get the right questions, and to be respectful of time. First and foremost, huge shout out to Bobby. It was so wonderful getting to work with him. We worked on a previous project a month or so ago, and now we're keeping that momentum going. When it comes down to good filmmaking, it's all in the relationships and trust. He put the video production together and kind of set me on the path to say, hey, I want you to direct these interviews. It's always an honor when I get to work with other creatives. Now, leading into this, our photographer, Emma, she brought her team, and they were super great to work with too. I think the core thing of filmmaking that's really important is understanding that it's collaborative. That's very much a team sport, and it takes teams working together. It's not about getting the thing that you want the way that you need it, but figuring out ways that you can work together as a cohesive unit and make a great experience for the people that are involved. Bobby laid this out to me and said, with RTRX, we really want to capture these masterclass interviews as well as some attendees and really educate what the event is about, as well as who the characters are and what their contributions are, because this is going to be used for immediate content as well as future content. Now, obviously with that, I get to learn a lot. I get to be curious, and I get to ask questions and learn in real time. I've found as a director that helps me because I can ask the same questions that maybe someone else who's considering this event can ask. So it allows you to dive a little bit deeper, but you also have to be careful to do enough research to know at least what you're going into and to be able to guide each interview along and give them the purpose. Anytime you're dealing with someone who's doing keynote speaking, they typically have flights in and out. They're on a rush timeline. They have the focus on the prep of the speech. So you want to make it as easy as possible. Anytime I'm dealing with a tighter window, I like to know what that time is. And the first thing I'll usually set up is just asking, how much time do you have to give me? I want to be respectful of your time. I want to set the expectations. I want to do a really good job. This shows them that I care about their time. Once you kind of know what the objective is, it's so much easier for me as a director to let the person to be interviewed know exactly what I need them for and to give them more intention to their words. Rather than preparing 10 perfect questions, it's really about setting them up for, listen, this is what I'm using your interview for. This is the impact it's going to make. And I'm going to ask you some questions, but I'd love for you to be able to riff and kind of tie things together in your own way.
Yeah. 10 minutes here.
Okay, so I'll give you the rundown. I'm not going to hear my voice.
Yeah.
What I really want to use here is I want to connect your story to giving purpose to why this event matters, why events like this matter, how it helps change lives, and I want to connect to your story here.
Being vulnerable is one of the greatest risks a person feels. And I think a lot of the people I work with have really big dreams. And I think one of the most vulnerable things that you can feel is when you're chasing a big dream that requires a huge amount of commitment and you don't know what the outcome is.
That's what's so great about working with someone who is a speaker is often they're pretty good about speaking and sharing their points of view, but also giving them the guidance to say, we don't want this to be a copy pasta of what you did for your presentation. We want this to feel you. We want this to feel personal. We're shooting at Kemba Live. Prep goes a long way. We had 2 hours to prep for the first interview. Now, to be honest, the first 30 minutes is really getting everything loaded up, set up, and in general placement, and then using that extra hour and a half to really prep, practice, make sure everything looks good. So that way when that first interview walks in and sits down, there's not any dialing of details. It's just ready to go and it's ready to make the most of that time. Emma and her team came in and they actually had a handful of backdrops because they were going to shoot portraits simultaneously to us shooting the interviews. Now, what I really liked was we were working in a very dingy, dark room. It didn't have very much to work with and it was going to look kind of sad and depressing if I'm being honest. We actually brought in their backdrop that they were going to use for portraits and we lit that so that way photo and video could build off of that look while they actually built off a separate set with a gray backdrop. We were able to make this roughly 14 by 14, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe a little bit smaller room, work for photo and video, having 2 sets going and make it really simple for people to sit down and make the most of every single second. We kind of went in with the plan of like, let's set this up. Let's keep this as simple as possible. You know, from a technical standpoint, I had my key light, which was an Aperture 300X with a softbox and a grid on there, pointed on the subject and a little bit on the background. So that way the subject was the brightest and the background still caught a little bit because we had this beautiful gold textured background. And I used one of my Emerick tube lights. They're like a 2-footer and used that as a rim light and pointed it again on the backdrop just a little bit too. What I ended up initially starting with was off frame, keeping it very simplistic, but I actually moved it in frame and actually used it exposed to make the set a little more interesting. And I found one of the practical lamps that were in the room and just moved it in, put some gaff tape on the back of the light bulb so a bunch didn't spill off onto the background and it was mostly just there for a set piece rather than kicking off a bunch of light. And one other thing to note too, is anytime I'm working on a project, I like to know, is this going to be used for social? Is this just going to go on the website? And there's always a combination of things anymore. So I love wide framing. I think it feels more powerful. I think it feels more professional. You're seeing that trend in Netflix, Hulu, whatever the big platforms are for interviews looking that way. But additionally, it's nice because you're setting up for more vertical aspects too. I know a lot of people like to shoot like literal vertical. I love to frame for vertical or horizontal and capture in that way. So this frame really works nicely for being a beautiful, wide, interesting vertical frame. We're also more focused on a composition that works great for vertical social content, taking up more real estate that way too. Anytime you're dealing with high profile, interviews, you do want to make sure that you're prepared and you're thinking through the best use cases for this content. I came in just as a director. This wasn't my project. I was just here to manage one facet of this, but I want to do my due diligence and make sure I cover my ground and I'm giving the people that I'm working for the best possible deliverables, the things that are going to make the biggest impact. And I know Bobby is working directly with this footage, but also the internal team at RTRX is going to be working with this footage too. So how do you make it as simple and useful as possible? You simplify things. One additional technical note is, this was a one-man band situation. They were out there capturing B-roll. I was technically the DP, the director, and managing all the interview stuff myself. I like to set things up as simple as possible. We had one camera. It was the Red with a 35mm on it. We didn't have any filtration, anything crazy. I just ran one shotgun mic in, a NTG2. I know some people are like, oh my gosh, you got to lob up and do all that too. What I find is we don't have the time to be doing that and taking up that extra time. Sure, on a more professional set, you might do that, but I can trust the NTG2 to push right down in there. And it also makes it so that way people can just sit down and get up and get in and out as quickly as possible without any miking or demiking or messing up a tire or dealing with any of that. Now, all the professionals out there could say, you're insane, don't do that. But literally, I'm thinking about time and, the experience and the energy and really creating a connection with these people in such a short time frame. When you only got 5 minutes for an interview, you want to make sure 4 minutes and 30 seconds of that is them opening their mouth and sharing as much as possible. So you got to think through how you build that vulnerability. Big piece of this was collaborating, making the most of this, getting through the technical details and dialing that in as much as possible. Once you have that foundation set up, then you can really focus on how do you get that best interview. Now, leading up to this, I had all the research to be able to dig in, and I learned enough about each one of these speakers to spark my curiosity. But also, I would step out during any one of the speaking engagements, and I would take little general notes. One thing from your speech that really struck with me is and I want you to kind of take it your way. To me, it's some people can look at failure as this really negative word, but really it's a lot of lessons, and getting that out of your system gives you a lot of peace. I would love to hear, how do you handle adversity?
I think it's important for people to embrace failure, because failure is actually a teacher. Success leaves clues, but so does failure. Nick Saban told me one time, a good player learns from their own mistakes, but a great player learns from the mistakes of other people. So failure is a part of the process. When you love the process and you embrace the process, then you love what you do and you become a better version of you. That's how we get to where we want to be.
I love that so much too, because it also removes the competitive nature that's maybe more negative. Beautifully said. Most of my interview style is just based off curiosity. I know my go-to questions. I know the basic things I can ask, but most of the time I'm relating, I'm listening, and I'm watching body language, and I'm seeing where people warm up when they speak on things, and I lean into that more to get them speaking. Obviously, I have an objective, and I got to bring it back to the RTRX event, but if I can get them to talk about the things that they feel most passionate about, I usually lean into that first, and then I connect it back to the event later. Let's say there's someone here that heard all these things. Exercising creativity daily. What's that internally feel like? What does that do for you? And maybe how does that fuel maybe chasing that a little bit more, building up those muscles almost?
Yeah, it's funny. As far as exercising creative muscles on a day-to-day basis, for me, it's actually often not that fun. There are moments of inspiration when I might feel really excited about pursuing a certain idea, but that's 5% of the time that I'm actually creating something. And I think the key for people who are trying to use an artist's creativity in their work or find their own kind of creativity is to not wait for the moments of inspiration to act, because if we can get ourselves to try stuff out when we don't feel like it, that's when some really amazing long-term progress can happen.
If you're new to interviewing, my advice would be do as much research as possible. Get as confident and comfortable as possible, because it's going to reassure you. But the further you go, if you're more experienced as an interviewer, I would actually encourage you to jot down less questions, keep them more broad, focus more on listening, and really listen to those cues. If you're brand new, you're probably not going to be as high stakes. Your interviews are probably going to take a little more time. But oftentimes, even if I have all the time in the world, I'm trying to keep my interviews in a 20 to 30 minute window, mostly because people get fatigued after a while. And if they're talking and ranting and rambling too long, it's going to make them exhausted, and your interview's quality is going to go downhill after that 30-minute mark. Your best time frame is going to be under 20 minutes anytime, but I think when you're in that 5 to 20 minute window, there is some serious pressure of goodness, I gotta nail this down. From an execution and an experience and workflow standpoint, as soon as the speakers would come off the stage, essentially Emma would take them. And I loved working with Emma because she's so personal. She just has this energy about her. So she took care of all of that. I tend to spend a lot more time in my head, and I'm not as outgoing and extroverted in that sense. I'm thinking internally about what's going to be my first question. How am I going to warm them up? How am I going to set the stage and make it their show rather than mine? Emma's personality is so amazing and comforting and just warm that she was just guiding them along, and I was capturing B-roll of all this going on, which I just thought it was really fascinating to see the way she worked and warming them up and setting them up over to me to where I could just sit down and be ready to go. Making sure your camera's ready to go, making sure your audio is ready to go, and just rolling those things as quickly as possible, making the most of every second was a huge focus of mine. But really looking back on the day, things went super smooth. We had 2 days of production on this, and I just really love, all the sound bites we got. And it's something that I feel like when we're thinking about interviewing, I think so many of us get focused on having the perfect questions. And I think there's a super skill of really being curious, really listening, really understanding what this is, and thinking about how can I connect this to the objective that this brand or that this business or that this event has, because that's going to help get the best interviews, giving them purpose. Right when they would sit down, I would spend some time explaining what the purpose of this video was and letting them know what expectations I had. And just as they would answer, I would think through what's the next thing I want to ask? What's the piece I want to ask? And if I get really unsure in an interview, as will happen, some people are going to be better speakers, some people are going to need more guidance. I always have my notes. So as I was listening, I was jotting down notes that I would have, and I would go to those if I needed them. But for the most part, it's making the most of every second in these high pressure situations. And I think it's coming off an event like this that it really makes me feel grateful for spending some time developing the skills. I love making interviews, and I know the lighting and the camera work goes a long way. But it was one of these moments where I'm like, oh, I'm actually really good when the stakes are high, and sitting down and building some confidence amongst each person that I'm dealing with and setting the stage for them to give some really amazing answers. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm super proud of this event. I love the way it looked. I love the team that I was working with. I'm feeling super inspired just from listening to all the different leaders and the keynote speakers. And in general, it's just one of those moments that's like, while it's been kind of a crazy season, I'm super grateful for opportunities like this. And it's making me really consider more of the directing side of things. Although I love being a DP, I love anytime I get to be a director, that gets to ask the curious questions and learn and absorb as much as possible. If you're sitting here and you're thinking, man, I want to do more directing, I want to do more interviews, I want to really up that skill, do your research if you're brand new. Prep your questions, but make sure you're listening actively. Listen and look at the body language. If you see someone warming up on a certain thing that they feel really passionate about, lean into that. And I'd say my last piece of advice is the way I leave every single interview is with an open-ended question. Before anyone gets up, I always like to ask, is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't talked about? Because I only know what I know, and I don't want you to get up and walk away and wish that you had shared something else. 9 out of 10 times, this is the best question I ask because it lets them set the stage. I've warmed them up. I've made them feel confident. They feel really comfortable with me. And now I can just let them say whatever they want to say. And 9 out of 10 times, that is the best soundbite that I get every single time.